Welcome back. In this video, we're finally going to build a page with some color using CSS. I'm going to start by going into my web development folder and creating a new folder for this site. This folder will be used to store all the pages of the site, along with a folder for all the images and, of course, the CSS files. Now, I just need to drag this folder onto my VS Code icon to open VS Code with this folder loaded up. First thing I have to have in here is my index.html file. Next, I need a folder where I can store images. Good file management is a good habit to get into. It will make things easier as the site gets bigger. And, as promised, we are going to introduce CSS. So I need my CSS file, which I will name styles.css. I will create the boilerplate code by typing exclamation mark and hitting the tab key. I want to change the title to My Website, and I'll go ahead and just space things out a little more to my liking. Remember, the browser will ignore any spacing you make in here. It really is just to make your code easier to read. Before we start creating some elements, I want to open this up in Live Server. This means we can see our changes as we make them. And I'll just set the windows up side by side. We only need a narrow browser window for now, because we will be taking a mobile-first approach to our website. I'll cover this in more detail in a future video. Now, do you remember the newer semantic tags, header, main, and footer? We are going to use those as well as some of the standard div tags. But first thing we must do is link that CSS file we created earlier to the HTML file. We'll type link and hit tab. It already has a rel of style sheet, so we only need to type the href, which for us is just styles.css. So what can we do with this? Well, a lot. Let's go into our CSS file and throw in a background color. We'll type body because we want this style to apply to the entire body element, which is the whole page. Then we need opening and closing curly braces. We'll then type background color, and I'll go with black. And there it is. Our page is now set with a black background. So we now know that our HTML file is loading up our CSS file and applying our styles. The aim with this is to keep all the actual content of the page within the HTML file and all the styling and design separate in the CSS file. This works great because, if later on you want to change the color of the header on all your pages, you only need to make that change in one CSS file. I've got rid of that black background because I want to create separate styles for the header, main, and footer, rather than applying styles to the body. Let's add our header, our main, and our footer sections so we can play around with some styling. Over in our CSS file, we can now select our header element by just typing header, remembering our curly braces. Now let's add another background color. This time though, it will only apply to our header element and not the whole page. I'm going to go with a dark blue. Looking at the browser window, there is no change, not a drop of blue. That is because our header element is empty. It currently has nothing to give it any height. I'll give it a h1 tag and write my website. And now it appears. My website with a dark blue background. It looks kind of awful though. That text with the default black color is difficult to read. Let's fix that with another style. Color to change the text color to something lighter. There's also some default margin and paddings in HTML. I'm going to get rid of them by using the asterisk, which applies to the entire document, and adding a padding of 0 and a margin of 0. This is going to override those defaults so my header tucks up to the edges of the window. That is better. That is the look I want. I said in the last video that a list can be used for menus. That is what we're going to do here. We will create a list, make each list item a link, and then use CSS to style them into buttons. We'll start by adding our unordered list UL tag. Inside that, we need a list item. We will make the list item a link by placing anchor tags around it, with the opening A tag before the opening LI tag and the closing A tag after the closing LI tag. We'll give it a href of index.html, as I want this to link to the home page. This might seem unnecessary since we're on the home page, but we'll use this header on multiple pages later on. I'll type home in the LI tags. Now I'll just copy and paste this entire line 4 times to create 4 menu items. Now we have the most unattractive menu in our header, but at least we have a menu. I'll make the second page our About page. And I'll go ahead and change the addresses in the href to just a hashtag. These will just be used as placeholders for now. The hashtag alone actually redirects to the top of the page when clicked. I'll name the last page Contact Us. This is one page present on almost every site, and it is commonly last as you want your visitors to browse your site before getting in touch. And my final page. I'll just name Portfolio for now. Now, we really need to make that header look a lot better, so we'll head back over into the CSS file. The first thing I want to do is center everything, so we'll add a text-align property with a value of center. Then we will start work on our menu. To select this, I'm going to type header UL. This selects the unordered list in header, but won't affect any other lists we add later on. I also want to go into our universal selector at the top and add a style of text decoration of none. This will remove the default underlines on our link items. I want to display our list items in one line, not stacked, so we'll add display inline, but they're still stacked. To fix that, we need to add LI to our selector to apply it to the list items. Now, we need to make these links look more like buttons. We'll do this by selecting the anchor elements using header ULA. We can add a background color to these anchors to give them some shape. We'll also add some margin to create a little more space around them. 5 pixels should do. It's worth noting, margin provides space outside the button. And we'll add padding, another 5 pixels, and as you will see, this creates extra space inside the button. So it is margin for space outside the element and padding for space inside the element. I'm going to add some padding to the header element, so space inside the header to prevent the button overflowing at the bottom. A border radius will curve those sharp corners of our button. Just a few pixels will do. Now, these list items are actually looking like buttons, all with a relatively few lines of CSS. Now I'm going to add another style, and again, target the header, ULA. But this time, I only want the style to be applied when the cursor is hovering over the element. So I'll add :hover to the selector. These are known as pseudo classes. In here, I'll add another background color. This time, I'll go with a lighter blue. Aqua will do nicely. This color is only seen on each anchor item when the mouse is hovered over it. This simple but effective hover class provides a nice interactive feel to our page. There are plenty more things you could do here, like adding transition effects, but we'll keep it simple for now. I'm also going to add some padding here so the blue hover effect fills the button. This is annoying. There is something causing those borders on either side of the button on hover. I have typed A space colon hover. That space shouldn't be there. That actually took me longer than you'd think to spot and fix the error. Thank God for video editing. These things will happen. A small error causing an unwanted effect. I want the text in those buttons to be bolder. To achieve this, I'll use font weight, bolder. We'll leave the header as it is for now. Next up, I want to create a footer at the bottom of the page. Now, because we have nothing in our main, whatever we put in our footer will show immediately below our header. That isn't going to look good. So, as a temporary fix, to get around this, I'll give the main a minimum height. Now we can start styling our footer. I'm going to copy and paste all the styles from our header into our footer, since I want them to match. There are better ways to do this, primarily selecting multiple elements at once. But we'll cover that later when we come back to tidy up our CSS. Now, let's actually place some content in our footer so we can see what we've got. I'm going to type the ampersand symbol, copy, finished with a semicolon. This will give us the copyright symbol. To keep things as they should be, I'll place that inside a pair of p tags. And I'll just fill it out with a little more text. Wait, something is wrong. The footer isn't where I want it to be. It's not much of a footer when it is sat with the header. Let's have another look at the CSS I wrote for the main section. 50% clearly isn't working. There are a few different units you can use in here. I've used 50% when what I actually meant to put was 50 pixels. And now I have a space of 50 pixels separating the header and the footer. I actually want a much bigger gap. Plus, I want the gap to be dependent on the height of the screen. So I'll change the units from pixels to viewport height, VH. Now I can tinker with this a little, changing the value until the footer is in a place I am happy with. And that'll do nicely. Back in the HTML document, I can get back to adding more text to my footer. I'll just say who it was created by, me, and I'll add the year. Adding the year is good practice because visitors can see that your site is up to date. We now have a decent looking page, with a header that contains a menu and a footer. Now we want to move on to adding some content to the page. I want to add 4 blocks or cards. Each can then link to something different, but I want to style them all the same. I'm going to achieve this by adding some divs, one inside the other. The outer div can have a class of cards. We'll then use this class to control how the cards are displayed. Inside this, we'll have another div with a class called card. And we will use this class to control how the cards look. We can use this one class of cards for all of our cards. This means we can have several, but only have to write the styling once. With that done, and the div copy and pasted so we have 4 of them, we can now head into our CSS and turn them into cards. To target anything by class name, we use dot followed by the class name. If we were to use IDs, we would use the hashtag followed by the class name. We'll start by styling our card. So with dot card, we can give it a height and a width. I'll just give the both a value of 100 pixels for now, but I'll definitely change that later. I want to be able to see my cards on the page, so I'll give them a background color. Nothing too bright, just enough color so that I can see that they are there. And now we can see we have something there. It looks like one long block, but actually that is our 4 divs stacked on top of one another. This is because a div is a block element, so each new div is started on a new line by default. That is something we will need to address, as I want my cards side by side. Giving them a border with the values of 2 pixels for the width, solid, to create a solid line, and black for the color, we can now see our 4 individual boxes or cards. I want to add a few more CSS styles to our cards. I'll give the border radius of 5 pixels to soften them corners. I also want to give it some margin to space them out a little. And I'll adjust the height and width. After all, these need to be large enough so that later we can add an image and some text along with a button inside each one. Excellent. Now the final element to style is the cards div. That is the div we created that contains the 4 card divs. So we select that with dot cards. Introducing Flexbox. Flexbox is a way we can control the way a bunch of block elements are displayed. We'll make this a flexbox by typing display: flex. By default, flex items, which in our case are each of the cards, are displayed in line. So our 4 cards are now squashed on one line. I'll change this by giving it a flex wrap value of wrap. Now our cards maintain the size we gave them and wrap onto a new line. I don't like how the margin is larger on one side, so I'll add a justify content with a value of center. Now, I have what I want. 4 boxes centered on the screen. And if I increase the screen size, the cards will adjust to fill the width while also staying centered. The powers of Flexbox. And that it is for this video. We've covered a lot of stuff here. Anything you're unsure about, just go back and re-watch that section. Also, don't be afraid to play around with values and see what results you get. Experimenting with CSS is a great way to learn. Goodbye for now. Hope to see you back again in the next video.